Why don't we introduce ourselves really quickly? I guess we'll start with Lawrence. He's at the far end of the table in my Zoom. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I know, right? I always try to sit in the middle.
These Zoom meetings, I always want to do the whole Brady Bunch thing, where you look down, but we're not all locked in, and so it's frustrating. You have people just gazing into space. Hi, everybody. I'm Lawrence M. Schoen. I write primarily science fiction. I don't know if we're supposed to plug our latest work at this time or not, whatever Michelle decides is appropriate for us. Putting her on the spot when she doesn't want to be on the spot, but she's the moderator.
Sure, go ahead. Mention your latest book. Go ahead. I generally tend to leave it because I was at one panel in one place. The moderator was an academic and it took 20 minutes.
Oh, good Lord. Well, I've been an academic, right. but so I've been an author longer, and I know not to build a wall of books in front of me, not even virtually when you can't actually knock it down, which I've seen done on live panels. But I will hold up an arc or proof of my latest, The Soup of the Moment. It is a prequel novella from my Barsk series that went live less than a month ago, and I'm really excited about it. And the other plug is I'm doing a Kickstarter for a book of 100 meals from the 10 years I've been running the Eating Authors series. Some of you have been on that. And it's been running just over 3 days now. It funded last night, and now we're pushing for more freebies and stretch goals. So I'll put a link for that in the chat notes later.
You can probably add it now if you want. Djeli, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Fenderson Djeli Clark. I'm here because I also write science fiction, believe it or not.
Actually, keep going.
I'm located in New England. I'm in the state of Connecticut. And I'm supposed to plug my most recent work is coming out in about 10 days. I will have, there you have it. You have it and I don't. So you're doing, my agent would love you because.
No, well, it's an uncorrected proof. I have it because I also do reviews for FNSF, but I thought, no, wait, I actually have that one here.
Book by a novella by the name of Ring Shout, out by Tor.com. So yeah.
All right. Nobody asked. So Klobah, is that how you want to be referred to, or is there a first name that you'd rather use?
Yeah, I go by Waimi. My full name is Waimi Marewa, but just Waimi is fine. I'm a speculative fiction writer. I dabble in fantasy and science fiction. I'm based in San Juan, Puerto Rico, an island in the Caribbean, for those who don't know. And my most recent work just came out in the September issue of the Dark magazine. It's called Call Them Children. I can link it in the chat.
Okay, great.
And then Christina.
Hi, hi, I'm Christina. I'm from Singapore, and I write primarily speculative poetry. Although this year I had my first novelette published. It's called Fury. It's a bit of a science fiction horror post-apocalyptic story, which began as a short story, but kind of ended up really long. And I'm really excited. Yeah, I'm really excited that it's been published. It's in the Black Cranes, Tales of Unquiet Women, an anthology by Jean Flynn and Lee Murray. And it was just released actually this week.
I'm Michelle Sagara. I write the cast novels. My first 4 novels were a short story when I started it. So I have some sympathy. Well, when you're not writing to market, and all of the advice about length wasn't quite there. So I had started the short story. Then it'll be I'm not near the end yet. Maybe it'll be a novella. Okay, it'll be a novel. Okay, oh my God. It'll be 2 novels. Okay, it was just, I'm very crap at it. I'm not good at it. All right, so this panel is about what the state of science fiction in the world. And I'm going to say up front again, I'm very monolingual. So all of my intake of science fiction from around the world is in English, in translation. And I think I don't. So I have read things in translation, but I absolutely am aware that they are not by far the only science fiction and fantasy in the world. It's just that subset that my upbringing, Asian household, Japanese speaking parents, but it's very conformist. You are going to live in this country. You need to be able to speak English or you won't be able to get along with people. So they just never spoke Japanese to us and at all. And the words that I got, or the words that I learned, were specifically, you'd listen for a certain tone of voice because they'd be saying, we have to take the kids to the dentist, right? And you get the word dentist and a whole bunch of other things. And so your deeply suspicious nature would be, okay, I know what that word means now. And I know what this word means. It's survival based. So I want to throw it actually open a little bit because, as I said, mostly what I've been reading, like the 3-body problem or other things, are things that were adopted into a very monolingual market. And Wei-Ming was nodding at something. Do you want to? So unfortunately, nodding or laughing means you get to go next. It's like fighting for the mic in the wrong direction.
It's fine. I do agree with you a lot in terms of, like, I think there's quite a big translation issue in terms of, like, my biggest knowledge base is definitely in terms of what's coming out of Latin America, what's coming out in Spanish, right? Because Puerto Rico is a bilingual country. Fortunately, there is a lot of Latinx writing that is coming out in English because a lot of Latinx writers are diasporic, right? And you have them writing in English, so you have them incorporating Spanish in some subtle ways, or basing their stories in Latin America. Like you've got authors like Silvia Moreno Garcia, who just came out with Mexican Gothic, right? And you've got Daniel Jose Older and Carlos Hernandez. You've got all of these people that are writing in English, but they set their stories maybe in Latin America and sometimes include bits of Spanish in the fiction. So it's cool because you get that code switching dynamic going on, which really adds something to the fiction. And I think a lot of online magazines are putting in the work to highlight Latinx writers. Right, I don't know if right now or they just closed the submission period, but Strange Horizons is organizing a volume of Mexican spec fic, and I think they just closed submissions like a few weeks ago. So that's something to look forward to, and there are quite a lot of anthologies of translated literature from Latin America. So that's really good. You've got some anthologies that are from writers that are writing in English called Latinx Rising, Latinos Rising. And I think there are 2 volumes of that out. So for me, in terms of getting into writing that's been being done in Spanish, anthologies are the best way in, because they compile all of this work and go through the effort of translating it. But there is a lot of writing that gets left out, unfortunately, because if you don't end up in the anthology, then publication houses aren't as big on a global scale as they are for the Anglophone market. So it's hard for translation to really get started.
You know, I like to think that's starting to change a little bit as the industry changes as well. And you know, I started out as a traditionally published author and have moved into the indie world. making me a hybrid. And it's the Wild West there. And particularly with some of the up-and-coming indie publishers who are just trying to break into other languages with translating their works into other languages, finding where there are markets, because it's all about how do I make money on this. And there's in some ways a different tone to the competition, where people are more willing to help other people out, where people go into anthologies with the understanding that, okay, there are 20 of us in this anthology. Everybody has a social media platform or a newsletter. Pimp this book and we'll all get new readers.
Actually, though, that's an interesting question, right? Because it's not a zero-sum game. And I truly believe that no two writing voices are the same. So you want that breadth of voices, but publishing is also business. And a lot of people are afraid to do different. Because if you're an editor, you want one or two big books behind you. It's how you build in-house credit. It's how you build the ability to take other risks. It's really tricky.
Well, I had a conversation years ago with the late David Hartwell, and I said, why is Tor buying my book? It's a weird book. And he said, Lawrence, that's because we have these other people like Brandon Sanderson and Orson Scott Card, and the other name escapes me. And we're making our money off of them. So we can afford to throw you a few pennies. And who knows, maybe you'll break out. And if not, hey,
really upfront.
You're a Tor author, run with it.
It is really upfront.
Yeah, we had known each other for years and years. But I think, Michelle, you bring up a good point. The motivations of your publisher or your editor are very different from your motivations as an author. Yeah, sure, there's an overlap. We all, Shakespeare wants to be paid, right? We all want to be able to make a living, quit the day job and all of that. Mm-hmm. But the authors want to be read. And I'm seeing more and more examples where you put your work out. There are promotions every day where here's a page with 40 books on it. You click the link and you can download somebody's short story or novella, sometimes even a full novel for free, and they're trying to hook you in.
Okay, Lawrence, actually, all of that is true, but it's kind of moving a little bit too far to the side. The question about publishability is hugely important, I think, for science fiction and fantasy that is not in North America. But so I wanted to slightly move to Christina, who's been very quiet. No, it's fine, because what you're saying is true. It's just
off topic.
Is on topic and off topic, but yeah.
Topic
around the world. I'm sorry. Christina, I wanted to, because you live in Singapore, right? Yes. So what does the science fiction and fantasy genre look like there?
Well, it's had a wonderful it's had a wonderful run these last 10 years. I think a lot of the effort came from an American friend of mine who moved to Singapore, I think about a decade ago, Jason Eric Lundberg. And he started a speculative magazine, which published fiction, poetry, and comics as well. And basically it was centered around Southeast Asia. So a lot of Southeast Asian writers contributed. And actually that was how I started writing again. I took 8 years off to raise my kids and was really too zonked to write anything really. Yeah, I started writing again, and I submitted 2 poems to him. And the condition was that it was set in Southeast Asia, which was very interesting for me, because growing up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, I read mainly American novels and British novels. I grew up on Enid Blyton. My perfect childhood was growing up in the countryside, but in Singapore, everything is very urban. And growing up, watching, reading novels like Dean Koontz horror stories, and F. Paul Wilson's wonderful horror science fiction stories. That was what I grew up with. And if you ask me to write a story or poem, it would be based there, with that sentimentality. And what challenged me this year actually was Lee Murray approached me and said, she'd like a story from an Asian perspective. And I was like, oh gosh, that's going to be tricky, because everything I wrote was based in, small town in America, right? Because that's all I read about. And if I had to put myself in Asia, it would be like, what would I write? We have our own mythologies, like the Pontianak, which I think there was this really good writer, I think Charlene Teo, she wrote this novel called Ponti, which is based on the Pontianak. Basically, Pontianak is it's this beautiful woman in white, and she approaches at night on the road, and please don't stop for her, because she'll stop and kill you or something. Yeah. So it's myths like that I felt that I knew, but I didn't have a grip on, and I didn't feel like I was qualified to write about it, even though it was part of my culture. And so when Lontar came into Singapore and Southeast Asia, it really opened up. And reading all these amazing myths about what happened, in Southeast Asia, we'd get all kinds of science fiction stories about what happened here, and it really opened up everyone's perspectives to, hey, that could happen here too. And I think that brought a lot to the market, so to speak. And till today, I think Southeast Asia, especially the Philippines, it's really huge on publishing speculative fiction, and hopefully poetry soon, because that's primarily what I write. And I forgot to do my little promo, but this came out this year. It's a collection of dreamscapes, which is a combination of dark fantasy, horror, and science fiction poems. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much happening in Southeast Asia now. Another colleague of mine, Joyce Chung, she's published quite a bit of work in science fiction novels. Starfang, I think, was one of her latest books. And yeah, we have a lot of voices here that I think are starting to, seep into the international market, which is really nice, because, then when you look at everything, there's this whole global perspective to, aliens came one day, that okay, these are what the earthlings write about. And you get the whole anthropological perspective of what human beings on Earth in every corner it's like, and what we dream about and what we think about, and that's who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
Djeli?
I hope that answers the question.
No, it's good. As I said, for one of the interesting things for me is that a lot of non-native English-speaking writers came to science fiction through translations of the early science fiction or fantasy novels, and it seems like, yes, actually, it's a huge influence. You read it, you fall into it. I'm in Canada, and the Canadian market is pretty much the North American market. There are small Canadian presses, but by and large, if you're writing in Canada, you're writing in either French or English, mostly English in terms of sales. And I have to think about the fact that the seed of a lot of writers, at least older writers like me, are science fiction and fantasy classics. Lord of the Rings is not North American, but it's still an Anglo work.
Ben Bova was very huge for me, actually, when I started reading him, and it really opened up my world I mean, when I was young, all I wanted to do was be an astronaut. Then I realized you have to be American, and I have bad eyesight, so that's not going to happen. But when I started reading Ben Bova, it just opened up my world. I was actually there, and I think that's what fiction does. It brings you there. It brings you into that world, and I think that's what's so incredible about it. At the end of the day, it's a universal thing for us all, to be there, to be able to go there. And that's why we read too. For me, too.
Djeli, you've been so quiet.
Oh, yeah, I've just been listening. Okay, well, I guess going back from the very beginning, I'm also monolingual when it comes to my science fiction reading. So, I live in a country that is predominantly English-speaking United States, and the islands that I come from in the Caribbean were colonized. You speak whoever the colonizer, whatever language the colonizer left behind, and that is the Queen's English translated into a lot of patois. So for one, I actually appreciate that there's so much more translated science fiction now, even though I know that in translation, I may be losing things because there are certain cadences for language or certain things that simply don't translate. I learned this now as my work is translated and I'm speaking to someone writing me from China or writing me from France and saying, I don't have a word for this. Like, let's talk through this and see what we can come up with. And so I know that I'm losing things, but I'm still happy for what I'm able to get, right? That I'm now able to access so much of the science fiction, which I think, as Lawrence pointed out, that people are now putting into a lot of works, whether it's anthologies or what have you, or as you pointed out, indie markets picking it up and small presses. It's making it available. And on the one hand, that's great for those authors who may not have before had a market to put their work in. And it's great for me. I'm just being selfish because I'm getting to read all of these things from so many different places. And I just think it's a great time for that, right? That I think thanks to technology and everything else, we have this access, this global access to see how science fiction is written. To pick up on some other things, I think what was just being discussed just before I started talking about the influences, how the North American influence, or sometimes parts of the Western influence, still become the starting point for a lot of people around the world, for a lot of speculative fiction writers, wherever they are in the world. So for instance, I know a lot of Caribbean writers will tell you that their first, and this is in the Anglophone Caribbean, their first readings were, of course, coming from British writers. They read Tolkien, they read C.S. Lewis. This was how they got into speculative fiction. And so that's always there. But what I think is also fascinating, and I think Christina pointed out, that all these cultures, of course, long before somebody decided to give it a name or categorize it or what have you, have their own mythologies, have their own cosmologies, have their own attempts to understand the world, the future, the past, and so forth. And so what's always fascinating to me is that in nearly all of these various places where some of the early writers were introduced to those quote unquote Western classics of speculative fiction, Shelley or what have you, you then start going back and reading whatever figures were popular there. And then you start realizing, oh, here was somebody doing some form of magical realism. And here was somebody putting in speculative fiction long before they read any of these classics, but they were doing it, right? And I think that's fascinating when you start doing that, that almost like this backwards where you start doing this archaeology to see how the speculative fiction already exists in these cultures that may not have been defined this way. And so I think that's also a fascinating exercise, which I'm seeing happen as you see various speculative fiction communities and literary communities arise around the world, and people looking for that within various cultures and geographies and looking for that older speculative element.
Somebody is asking, what about Caribbean speculative fiction that uses Creole or Patois languages? Do you know?
Yeah, and what's really funny is that you point this out. two things. Sometimes patois can also be very Anglophone patois, where you're using a lot of loan words and various things. And so that is much of the speculative fiction that I am used to. But, there is also, there's speculative fiction from Haiti and other places that are using different languages to tell these stories and bringing their own cultural references in. And, I've wanted more of those translated, like even within the anthologies, when I go and I look at Caribbean anthologies, and this is a problem in the Caribbean altogether, it tends to be Anglophone. It happens in the academic world as well for various reasons that we can go into. But yeah, I think there's room for much of that, and it exists. And, I hope people are accessing it. I'm sorry, one last thing. Trinidad also has its lady that you should stay away from at night. Her name is Laja Bless. I think this must be a figure throughout various parts of the world, except she has a cloven hoof like a goat. She's very beautiful, dresses in a long dress. If you see her at night, do not go up to her.
Or look at her feet.
Yeah, don't mention her feet either. She doesn't like that.
There needs to be a story where these women in white meet for lunch sometime.
There it is. There you have it, guys. Prompt. That is it.
I want to mention Tobias Buckell, who has this wonderful series. It's space opera. There are aliens, but it's all written. The humans are all from the Caribbean. Or
the Xenowealth trilogy.
There we go. Thank you. And the Xenowealth trilogy, and it's more than a trilogy. It's just he keeps pumping these suckers out.
Yeah.
And self-publishing. I think the last collection, and the humans are on a world founded by people from the Caribbean. So the language is in there.
Yeah.
And which, I mean, I love foreign languages. And so I'm a friend of Toby's. So he just sucked me in right there. But if you want something not written directly for people who look like me, overeducated white men, getting on in years, that's a great place to start. It's refreshing and different. But I wanted to respond, if Michelle will let me, to something Djeli said. She hasn't cut me off. Okay, she has the mute button. Science fiction emerges in different cultures and countries and nations at different points in time. And in particular, I've been seeing this, a lot of my focus is on China. And they bypass, or their gateway drug from Western science fiction wasn't my gateway drug. They came in later. They skip over a lot of tropes and a lot of themes that we inherit in the US in science fiction, and they take it off in a different direction, one that is more reflective of where they are as a culture, as a society. And I'm just fascinated by some of those differences. And I don't know that I can articulate them. And that's a whole other panel, surely. But, the example of, in Latinx science fiction, the great rich history of magic realism. I mean, my Spanish is okay, and my goal is to read 100 Years of Solitude in the original Spanish, someday, because it's brilliant in the English translation, and I want to know what I'm missing.
It's absolutely beautiful in Spanish. Absolutely stunning. Yeah.
Have you actually read the English, Wemi? I'm just, because you could compare. Okay.
I haven't read the translation at all. I just know that the Spanish one is just absolutely incredible. And what Lawrence was saying is something that I've been thinking about a lot, because I think particularly Puerto Rico is really interesting in that from like pre-K to 12, we're taking English and Spanish literature classes at the same time. So you have all of these, usually American, sometimes British if you have a global lit class, but mostly American, all of these speculative fiction writers that somehow end up in the class, if it's a survey class, for example. But then you're also taking Spanish literature classes, and a lot of the times the classics, a very few of the classics are realist, I would say. I would say that there's an incredible amount of speculative fiction that is in Spanish, and our literature classes from pre-K to to 12, the main basis of them is on these on this rich legacy that we have from all over Latin America, right? So you're reading Cortázar, you're reading Borges, you're reading Marquez, and somehow that ends up influencing all of the ways that writing is being produced here. You know, you don't necessarily have just this one dominant perspective on how life can be looked at from a different perspective, or you know, you can play with how the future is going to be organized. You have just all of this, all of these influences coming in, so it creates a merger that's, I would say, rich and very, very unique in terms of the voice. It's
That's
very cool.
interesting, because that means what you have, your fallback, not fallback, but the core early books are split between these two things.
Yeah.
I believe that writers often, part of our life experience, because we're writers, is what we read.
Yeah.
And what we read is, at least, you know, from the age of 6, what was available in the bookmobile. I'm old. But we expand our reading tastes as we get older. So we're not just reading all the Nancy Drew books again, because, you know, we finished them. And no, seriously, I'd read all the Nancy Drew, all the Hardy Boys. It's whatever I could get my greedy little reader hands on. And those were easy because my cousins were throwing them away, you know. But it does become part of the loam. So our lives and the cultural influences are part of it. But I honestly feel at core, a lot of it is reading. What you read, what moved you, what was the genesis that caused you to stick your toe in the pond of actually writing for other people. And I would love, of course, I'm never going to have this, that the broader, early visceral experience be also a bit broader.
Yeah, but I think that, you know, I'd have to argue in favor of things like oral histories, and Christina spoke about this a little, about like local mythologies and folklore and all of these things, because it's not only what we intake by what we read, but also things that are just inherent to the culture and deeply popularized, because you know, you have this one street in this one town that you know not to walk in down because something bad is going to happen. And you know, I feel like all of these sort of local folk tales, at least for me personally, they end up in my writing so much of the time, so much, because we have this very rich, like, true belief that weird things happen here. And you know, we have a landing strip for UFOs. This is something that actually exists in Puerto Rico. And
really,
things like, yeah. And I've written about
How
it.
How busy is it?
I don't know. I've written about it because I just think that it's like so absurd. But of course that would happen. Of course, everyone believes that. So, you know, I think there is some stock to put into all of these sort of local tales that we have. And I think everybody has those, because we all grow up in these towns that have their own cosmology built around them, you know. So that at least is partially cultural, but it's also about location and place, you know.
I'm thinking now that when the aliens show up, assuming they haven't yet, they're going to come to Puerto Rico because you're the only ones who, you know, who put out the welcome mat. You know,
and why you be there, you know,
and that's where that's where the lunch with the ladies in white has to happen too now. For
questions. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Lawrence.
I was going to say, for reasons that don't bear explaining, I had an occasion to learn Comanche once upon a time, and began going through Comanche folktales and trying to deconstruct them and find patterns and commonalities, and they're there. And it was wonderfully insightful for me, because it's not the way I would think. It's not the way I write stories. And I can't stress enough, if you have the opportunity to expose yourself to folklore, folk tales, particularly from cultures that, you know, are being wiped out by the dominant culture where they happen to be. Get it while you can.
Somebody has just asked, what kind of folklore have each of the panelists intentionally included in their own works? Is it always your local folklore, or do you try to borrow folk tales from other cultures? Well, there are two really general questions, but I think they're general enough that might be one specifically best sources to find translated SFF into English. And I don't have that list. That's a much longer sort of undertaking. And one is, what are some of the current themes coming from around the world science fiction and spec fiction, which again is very broad. Does anybody feel like it's in the scope of the time we have left to answer?
Just very quickly, I'm not sure if you've heard of The Legend of the Condor Heroes, a translated book by Jinong in China about, it was out recently, I think the last few years, and it was touted as the next Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. But I actually can't read the original Chinese text. It's really beautifully written, but my level of Chinese was just never good enough. So I watched the original Cantonese TV series, which was incredible. It's really this epic tale, Legend of the Condor Heroes. And recently it was translated into English in three or four volumes. And perhaps because I've watched it, and I've watched it repeatedly since I was young, I've always felt that there was a little bit of lost in translation there. I know the third translator was not English, but if you don't know the backstory, I think if you read it, it's wonderful. The reviews are great. But having actually watched the story and watched it played out, I personally preferred some of the, I won't call fan fiction, but some of the some people who understood both languages, who watched both the story and read the text, and they translated it online. And I found it a bit more true to the story, so to speak. So I guess it depends on the source, and it depends how fluent you are with the language. And I guess with all translations, as Lawrence was mentioning just now, sometimes there is something lost in translation. And but if you don't know what it is, you can still get a really full story from what has been translated. But it's when you know both sides, then you sort of compare, and actually I liked it in the original language better. Oh, sorry, that's my cat. Sorry, my cat's come back.
You have never fed your cat in its entire life? That's what it's saying?
Yes.
Right. It's a cat.
Yes. So I've that's my primary experience with translation. There was actually also my grandfather's text with which I tried to translate from Chinese to English using Google Translate, and I realized during that exercise it was just crazy trying to translate it and trying to put what little I knew about my 12 years of Chinese in school, which at the end of the day isn't very much if you don't practice it. To translate it into something, a beautiful novel, right? You just can't. So I have the greatest admiration for translators, because they really have the hardest job to capture the voice of the author as well. And, yeah.
Can we move back to the question that I had mentioned about folklore? So start with.
I mean, yeah. So I think you were asking, do I use folklore that, let's say in my case, from the Caribbean in my writing? Yeah, all the time. and I'll put it anywhere. I wrote a story that was a secondary world fantasy where I drew a lot actually from Central African, Congolese, and Angolan culture to make it up. But I mean, we have winged baboons and giant feathered lizards. So, it's completely another world, completely. And I decided in the middle of that, I was going to throw in a character from Eastern Caribbean folklore called the Job, which is like I think, yeah, sorry, something happened.
No. They give a 10-minute warning.
Oh, I see. That's what's happening. Yeah, I
at the
decided.
back of the panels who
Like
wave the big
doctors.
sign and say 10 minutes, 5 minutes. They don't have
Right.
to
So
do
I
that.
decided to throw this character in there, who's a carnival character, which is like a devil character in the middle of this fantasy, right? And so I think that there's a way you can bring these various cultures. I think, like Lawrence pointed out, like Tobias does, like Nalo Hopkinson does very well, right? That you can take these various cultures and bring them into your writing. And yeah, so mostly I do that with Caribbean folklore, but of course I pull on other cultures as well, depending on the story, right? Yeah.
Things that have moved you. Wendy?
Yeah, I also do draw on Caribbean folklore, and actually the story that just got published includes these creatures called duendes, which are basically children that die before they're baptized, and then their feet get turned around. So yeah, those are one of the characters that are in there, and that particular figure is from the Anglophone Caribbean, but we have equivalents in the Hispanophone Caribbean, like La Ciguapa, which is this beautiful woman. She is kind of like what we've been talking about, but she has her feet turned on backwards.
I've
so
seen
yeah,
pictures.
you have a lot of resonances, and I definitely like. I think I haven't written a single story where I don't somehow involve folklore, because it's just so rich, and a lot of the times folklore, somehow the characters are sort of two-dimensional. They're not usually given a lot of depth. So then as a writer, you can explode that exponentially and give it dimension. And I think that's really fun. And it's a little bit like writing fan fiction, but I figure at this point we're recycling so many things in terms of what we read and what we write, that why not draw on folklore for that sort of thing?
Yeah, there are no new stories. There are only 3 stories. but everybody's take is different, because everybody's take comes from the culture and what they've read and loved and what they read. It just, everybody's take will be different. All right. Hold on for 2 seconds. No, I see. I'm sorry, Eliza. What are some of the current themes coming from around the world, science fiction and spec fiction? I think we passed that one, and we got one good answer. I don't really have enough of an answer for it, because again, I only read in translation. So like Three Body Problem or similar things.
I will say that, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in here.
Oh,
I would say that if I were to look at a lot of themes I've seen from Caribbean writers, I think there are some things that are the nature of the Caribbean itself, especially from a lot of the Anglophone writers. It's talking about empire. It's talking about colonialism. It's talking about what comes after empire. It's talking about how do newly formed nation states exist, right? When you may have other larger powers about you. And so I've seen those quite a lot. And I've seen a theme that I've certainly seen growing a great deal, speaking of the Caribbean islands, is global warming and the impact of global warming on places that are islands where water is, getting higher. So those kinds of things, I think I've been seeing. Some of them I've seen for a long time, and certainly the issue of global warming has increased, I've noticed, within speculative fiction from that region. Yeah.
Probably from almost everywhere. I think a lot of writers now are becoming more and more aware of the possible future. Or
can I throw an idea out there?
Absolutely.
Because we've been talking about it from one side, and the other side, which has existed, all along, but has been ramped up as the technologies have changed, is English language science fiction being imported in and translated into other cultures, into other languages. And it's not been on my mind because I just got a Chinese anthology in the mail literally yesterday that I have a story in, and I can't read it because it's in Chinese. And I love that. I love the idea that something I've written is going out to people who speak differently than me, think differently from me, and have been and what they think of as science fiction or fantasy overlaps, but is not a complete match for my own understanding of this. And then they come and tell me what my story is about or my novel's about, and I go, well, but I do that with American readers as well. So there's a strange commonality there. But what is, oh, we'll be, 5 minutes. What is going out? What should be going out? What should our science fiction and fantasy exports be to the rest of the world? That's a whole other panel. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's its own panel.
I just wanted to seed the idea.
Yeah.
Maybe for the Discord session that follows.
Well, actually, Discord is, I think that they'll put it in chat, but it's like the hall. You know how after a panel, people who didn't have questions answered will come up, or they'll wait till you leave and then they'll say, no, you said this and I just wanted to ask one question. That's what the Discord is for, if you're actually in Discord. If there are no other questions, and I don't think there are, we have 3 minutes before they actually really do just, they will shut down. But thank you all very, very much. It's given me a lot to think about. Actually, most of what I'm thinking about is we're all in dialogue with the same thing.
Yeah.
But the dialogue, of course, is it's a reader culture, book we loved. What we bring back from that is going to be different for all of us. But I think essentially, I don't know, we're all people. That's why when people ask me questions, I really focus on character or the characters or veracity to the characters, because those are the things that will reach across everything else. This is new, this is great, this is interesting. But me personally, if none of the characters resonate with me at all, I don't care. I know, I shouldn't say that. It's possibly, there's some very good short fiction, so I'm not trying to diss all short fiction. But sometimes it's much more that thematic idea, that 1-2 punch. And I frequently find it hard because the characters are, I don't resonate with them as much as I do with novels. So I like the novels for certain things because it gives me room to assimilate all of the new stuff and to see it as just, not just human, but it's human, right? It doesn't matter where. Everybody is affected by things. Everybody is hungry. Everybody wants love. Everybody, etc., wants power. Some people want power. It's the cultural web that makes it new, and also, resonates with the things that we're in dialogue with across the science fiction and fantasy spectrum.
All stories are human stories.
Yes, but I think they all should be, and that's what makes it interesting. And I don't think that different panel. But thank you all very, very much. You're all great.
Thank you.
We're going to close down. But I'm just, they'll close us down, but you can actually hit the leave button. Last time when I said, okay, we're closing up, this session has ended. So thank you all very, very much. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
And hopefully,
nice meeting everyone.
Now we can actually go someplace in person again, but maybe not.
Right. Bye.
Bye. Have a great convention.